There are many factors, including biological, psychological, social, and environmental, that are involved in the development of mood disorders. And what we'll do in this particular video is just sort of review how do the different theoretical perspectives look at where does the idea or the reality for many people's mood disorders come from. So this week, we're going to look at the theoretical perspectives. Let's get started. Research indicates that there is a robust and causal association between stressful life events and the major depressive episodes. Major depression is often associated by stressful events, although not everyone who experiences such events will become depressed. Stressors such as a loss of a loved one, prolonged unemployment, physical illness, marital or relationship problems, economic hardships, pressure at work, racism, and discrimination may all contribute to the development of the reoccurrence of mood disorders, especially in depression. Now, this is part of the reason where the theoretical perspectives sort of lean towards later in adolescence and early adulthood for these things to emerge, is that the biological precursors, if you will, of, say, depression aren't fully emerging until the additional adult stressors of life, as mentioned, start to interfere with the daily life experience that can activate or bring to fruition these depressive states for some people. Now we're going to start with the psychodynamic perspective. And in classic psychodynamic theory, depression is viewed in terms of inward-directed anger. Most will process through mourning rather normally and separate themselves from loss, whereas, other people who hold strongly ambivalent feelings towards people they have lost or whose loss is threatened may direct unresolved anger towards inward representations of these people that have incorporated or interjected within themselves, producing self-loathing and depression. It's what produced a sort of shift in the DSM-5, where it includes mourning as a part of a psychological disorder, particularly when extended beyond what is considered, normal mourning. And I think it's difficult in some cases to know how to distinguish between what is normal mourning and what is pathological. Bipolar disorder is understood within the psychodynamic theory in terms of shifting balances between ego and superego. More recent psychodynamic models, such as the self-focusing model, incorporate both psychodynamic and cognitive aspects in explaining depression in terms of the continued pursuit of lost love, objects, or goals that would have been more adaptive to surrender. Now, if we consider some of the more the alternatives of focuses, like for example in learning perspective, it focuses on situational factors in explaining depression, such as changes in the level of reinforcement. When reinforcement is reduced, the person may feel unmotivated and depressed, which can lead to inactivity and further reduction in opportunities for reinforcement. So reinforcement can include the positive social reinforcements that we get out of social relationships, access to friends and family. We have valued activities, changes in circumstances, loss of a job or divorce. So all of these things can, from a social learning perspective, and particularly from reinforcement element, can have a huge impact on the learning that can occur, that can produce more depressed states based on the set of circumstances and how we repeat and cognitively repeat the losses and the traumatic experiences that we have. And then without this positive, we could be in fact positively reinforcing the signs and the expression of depression. Now, Coynes, he introduced what he's known as the interactional theory that focuses on negative family interactions that can lead family members of depressed people to become less reinforcing to them. Based on a reciprocal reinforcement, experiences of give and take of a social support and reassurance is very beneficial. So the idea of being able to be positively reinforced for putting forward positive feedback to other people will receive, or you get back that positive feedback, which becomes a cycle of reinforcement and is better for us generally. So it's good to speak up to one another about what we're each is doing well, and to receive feedback from one another about how we're doing. A person with depression may receive the support initially. However, as they are they're not often very reciprocating, the reinforcement from others starts to decrease, and this can affect the person with depression by telling them or by them feeling more depressed, that they're not receiving good things from people. So this is more of a learned perspective, that you can, through the feedback we get from one another, learn that either you're doing really well or learn that you're not well received, which can teach us about depression and getting more depressed in our thinking. Remember, cognitive experiences and learning can be around the way we think. Jumping into cognitive, we'll look at, and you can check the cognitive distortions that are on page 158 and 159. Here what we look at is Beck's cognitive theory, which focuses on the role of negative or distorted thinking in depression. Now, again, cognitive is thinking. We can develop inappropriate thinking, even if we can identify that that's what it is. It becomes repetitive and almost becomes something we don't concentrate on and see. So let's carry on. Depression-prone people hold negative beliefs towards themselves, the environment, and the future. This negative triad of depression leads to specific thinking errors or cognitive distortions in response to negative events that in turn lead to depression. It creates automatic thoughts. This sort of, we don't think about what we're thinking, they just seem to emerge constantly. Now, there is a direction in cognitive called learned helplessness. It was developed by Seligman. And the learned helplessness model is based on the belief that people may become depressed when they come to view themselves as helpless to control the reinforcements in the environment or to change their lives for the better. He reformulated the version of the theory that held that the ways in which people explain events or their attributions determine their proneness towards depression in the face of negative events. So this combination of internal, global, stable attributions for negative events can render one more vulnerable to depression. If say, for example, looking at global, that you sort of see that everything out there is out to get you, rather than saying specifically there's a cause and effect between something, or that you see things as being more stable, you're less prone to depression than someone who would see that everything seems to be coming apart and is not predictable and I can't depend on it. Or that everything outside of me is controlling me, as opposed to internally, that what I get out of life is what I put into life. Can all contribute to our degree of helplessness, and therefore, from this theory, our degree of depression. Now lastly, we'll look at biological, and as you would imagine, they start out by looking at genetics, where genetics appear to play a role in mood disorders, especially in explaining major depressive disorder and bipolar. Imbalances in neurotransmitter activity to the brain appear to be involved in depression and mania. Twins and adoptive studies have added strength to this theory and a hereditary factor. Now, the last thing we can touch on in regards to sort of this biological perspective is that of the Diathesisstress model is used as an explanatory framework to illustrate how biological, and in this case psychological diathis, may interact with stress in the development of depression. So the Diathesisstress model, if you look at the left, you see the psychological vulnerabilities. This is something that you could develop in terms of your own life patterns, and then biological vulnerabilities would be those predispositions that some of us might have for certain conditions. And then you add the sort of additional stressors whether it be unemployment, divorce, or other social factors, that combination, either you've got good, healthy psychological, what would we call it, robustness, if you will, and low biological vulnerability, you could incorporate your coping strategies and gain some social support that will move you away from any depressed condition. Whereas if you have low psychological hardiness and high biological vulnerability, and you add those potential stress factors, chances are whatever coping mechanisms or social support you may have, one, they're probably not as strong or as capable or as robust, might lead you down the path of depression. And so that's looking at the Diathesisstress model for depression. All right, so that completes just looking at the theories and how they look at depression and how they may explain it. The third video that I will have posted for you will be looking at the treatments. And again, like you would expect, the theorists have different perspectives on how to treat depression. We'll look at that next. Thank you, everybody.